it's not like we didn't know what was coming, right? We've been hearing about it for 2 years now, at least. Um, for boxing fans, hardcore boxing fans, and for media, we've been noticing for a while that HBO hasn't been pumping anything into the future of boxing. Nothing was changing. You saw cutbacks in, for example, for Canelo Golovkin, they usually would do 3 episodes of HBO 24/7. They only did one. The quality of the fights, the Superfly 3 card was the lowest ratings of almost any HBO boxing card ever. That was that last card, right? Before Canelo Golovkin, September the 8th. I covered that card. We know that they didn't pick up Sergey Kovalev versus Eleider Alvarez 2 or Alvarez versus Kovalev 2. We know that Danny Jacobs versus Derevyanchenko is the last fight that's going to be on HBO. It's crazy. As it stands right now, let me clarify some things. In this article, it's looking like HBO is in the business of spectacle boxing. It's not necessarily known yet if they would pick up a Canelo Golovkin 3 because, for example, in this article from the New York Times. Okay, let me read this. Let me read this first. Let's do a little bit of reading Rainbow. I met this guy, cool dude. Peter Nelson, a 37-year-old executive vice president of HBO Sports, made the announcement that the new network was dropping boxing Thursday morning in a meeting with the HBO boxing production staff, a group that includes play-by-play announcer Jim Lampley, the analyst Max Kellerman, the ringside scorer Harold Letterman, and former boxing champions Andre Ward and Roy Jones Jr., who work for HBO as freelance commentators. Of the announcing staff, only Lampley is expected to remain with HBO. So I'm guessing that Lampley may do his fight game show maybe a few times a year. I thought that if HBO boxing was shut down, that maybe Lampley would probably be heavily so. Whether you like him or not, Jim Lampley was a part of our childhood. Whether you like him or not, you can say now that as you've grown up that he's biased and all that, but Jim Lampley was HBO boxing in regards to commentating. So I thought that if they were to let him go, that he would be heavily sought after by, the Zone, maybe Showtime, even though they got a good thing going. And I know people are going to say Showtime wouldn't bring him over there. You don't understand, obviously. If you look at it from a business standpoint, you think that people wouldn't be, these networks wouldn't be clamoring for Jim Lampley? Come on. Because you don't like him? You're in the minority. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I said, he'd be on some shit. But at the same time, it's hard to picture boxing without Jim Lampley. Harold Letterman, he may just go on and retire. Be like a novelty thing. Maybe, show up on an ESPN card every now and then, do something. On maybe the Zone probably can have something for him. What would he say? Okay, Brian Kenny. Okay, Brian. I don't know. Max Kellerman, obviously him being on ESPN already, he's doing pretty good. Andre Ward's over on ESPN. We don't know what Roy Jones is going to do. Let me go read something else. After 45 years, more than 1,000 fights in some of the most lucrative and controversial matches of all time, HBO's throwing in the towel. I mean, in reality, they couldn't compete with the Zone, with the money they were throwing around. They couldn't compete with Showtime, who's actually invested in the future of boxing. I mean, we saw, this year was, we saw it. Such bout sometime attracted as much as 1/3 of HBO's domestic subscriber base, which is roughly 15 million people at the time. Now that the base is roughly 40 million, but according to Nielsen, HBO boxing telecasts they're talking about 40 over all platforms like HBO Now and all that. HBO boxing telecast has averaged about 820,000 viewers, or 2% of the total audience. That's crazy. They also talked about in this article how Golovkin versus Martirosyan drew 1.3 million, but the Superfly fight September the 8th peaked at 349,000, making it one of the lowest rated boxing matches in HBO's history. Cards, boxing matches if it peaked. Here's something interesting right here. Boxing was no longer a profitable investment for HBO. Remember, HBO is a huge, gargantuan, giant network. Yes, they're having issues in regards to the changing of times with Netflix, but HBO as a whole is never going nowhere. You know, with the quality of their documentaries and their shows, their premiere exclusive shows, you know, and the movies, they're not going anywhere. You know, you'd be a fool to say some shit like that. When people get cable, and people are still getting cable, cable is not like it was before where, you know, everybody was getting it. You had to have it. Now cable is more of a middle class, upper class-ish type thing, I guess. You know, but now, you know, looking at it, if they're saying that average HBO boxing card costs about $3 million or so to make, which is, you know, that's right, you know, and that includes, you know, production and the budget for the fighters. That's why it's hard to see guys like Mikey Garcia versus Errol Spence on regular Showtime. Or I was even shocked that they gave us Danny Garcia versus Sean Porter on regular Showtime, because networks only have a certain amount that are given to them from the guys from up above that probably don't even watch boxing. They're looking at the numbers like, yo, this HBO boxing shit used to be, you know, good. We got to cut that. It's not doing anything anymore. You know, and then we're hearing about ESPN and boxing and everything. Can we? Nah, you know, they had to get out of it. So they're saying, you know, they can produce a documentary for Andre the Giant that 7 million people watch at 1.5 million versus a $3 million boxing event that only 349,000 people watch. Sheesh. You know? Some episodes of Game of Thrones garner audiences in the tens of millions. You know, and they're looking at stuff like this. And they're like, man, listen, you know, like, we putting all this money in and we ain't really seeing nothing in return. Like, this is we've seen this. Also, Billy Joe Saunders failed the drug test. I expect for the end of Jacobs versus Derevyanchenko for Jim Lampley and Max Kellerman and Roy Jones and Harold Letterman and all those guys to give like a nice long, you know, speech and saying thank you to HBO and everything. It's a shame, you know, but at least it wasn't just something that like just completely halted, you know, like, oh, nope, no more HBO boxing. We saw this coming. You know, we were already being conditioned to go to other platforms, you know, Showtime and ESPN to watch fights here in America. Bob Arum Ben told us this shit was going to go down. And with the influx of fighters that started becoming multi-million-dollar fighters, it was no way HBO can keep up. Heyman fighters, you know, HBO couldn't pay for guys like Crawford and Victor Postol. They had to put that on pay-per-view, made the fans pay for it. Lomachenko versus Rigo, HBO would have never paid for that. You know, even though Rigo didn't make $1 million, still, you know, the money just wasn't there. I mean, the money is there, but they're like, we're not putting no money into that shit. I'm TstreeT Controversy. This is TstreeT Controversy Live. Please subscribe.